Hello, welcome to a short demonstration video on easy seated pose. Sukhasana. Now, easy seated pose, for some, isn't that easy. So let's just remove the stigma of the name and consider for a moment that this pose may need to be propped for you, which is to say you may need to put some support underneath your body, whether it be on your hips or your knees, and I'll show you that in a minute. But it's really important for us to recognize where we need support in this pose so that we can really sit easy. Easy seated pose is the pose that is spoken of when we're in a meditation posture. But then there's also lotus, which is half lotus, and then the full lotus. The way that I'm seated right now is in half lotus, which is to say that the one foot is on top of the other thigh. Well, it's kind of like a bridge. But that's not the pose that I want to teach you today. Easy seated pose is pretty much crisscross. Crisscross. And so you have one leg that is crossed in front of the other. But what's most important is the spine. And so the idea here is that you have the bowl of the pelvis and the top of the mouth, the palate of the mouth, resting on top of one another. Now, what I see quite often with those who have short hamstrings, which will tend to shorten through the back, what I see with that is that there's a rounding of the spine. So there's an inability to sit up onto the two sits bones. The two sits bones are those two pointy bones right in through the glutes, right? So if you remove the flesh out from underneath you, you'll feel that there's two pointy structures. Easy seated pose must have those two pointy structures on the earth or on a prop. And so the intention is to make sure that those two pieces of your body are planted firmly into the ground. And if not, then we can look at other ways in which we can prop it. But to begin with, the pelvis is slightly swayed. And what I mean by that is that it's not completely flat. So the lower spine is not completely flat. There's a small curve in through that lower spine. And if you need to allow the belly to relax completely and for the lower spine just to dip a little bit more, then that's also fine. I'd rather have a tilt of the pelvis forward like this rather than the tilt, a posterior tilt, where the whole spine is affected. And so if this is your experience, if you're finding it very challenging to sit up onto the sits bones, then what I would recommend is using a prop. This is an actual meditation cushion, pillow, but you could use any pillow. You could use a folded up blanket. You could use blocks, anything like that. And I'll sit sideways so that you can see me. You'll place the prop down and then place your sits bones onto the prop and still cross the legs. Now, the cool part of having a prop in easy seated pose is that firstly, you'll sit on the edge of the prop to allow for your pelvis to tilt. So I'm going to show you how the pelvis tilts forward, right? So this is really sitting forward versus sitting all the way back, which places a lot of pressure, tension on the front of the hip. But if I'm seated with my shoulders over my hips and the palate of my mouth over the bowl of my pelvis, what tends to happen is that even though there's a small little curve in through my lower spine, the spine that naturally curves in an S shape will have me with my chest over my hips. All right? And so the intention of this pose is for meditation, for seated practices, for pranayama practice. And we want to be in a place where the body feels comfortable, where it's being taken care of, where it's structurally placed in such a way that you could sit in this pose for a very, very long time. And you do that by stacking your joints. So go ahead now and start to tilt the pelvis forward and back, and notice how it feels having your weight forward. This is super uncomfortable. It requires a lot of back strength. And in time, this will be very, very uncomfortable, even painful. And sitting backwards with a posterior tilt, you'll feel a lot of stress and pain in through the front of the hip joint. So you'll find the sweet spot by just tilting the pelvis back and forth. You can even close your eyes to find that perfect seat. And then feel the sits bones pressing down into the prop beneath you. And then, as I mentioned, having your hips lifted so that the knees are lower than the hips allows for a stronger foundation in through the legs, because the shin bones are grounded. So the minute you're able to lift your hips up, you're able to ground through the shin bones, keep your heels in alignment so that they're in alignment with the groin, one in front of the other in front of the groin, and ground through the shin bones to find even deeper connection with the earth, so that if you're in a pranayama practice or a meditation practice, you have much more solid foundation and grounding than if you are seated uncomfortably in a crisscross position with the knees lifted and the spine tilted back, or the pelvis tilted back like this. And I see this a lot. And we think that we need to be in Sukhasana pose and that we need to look like yogis, but this is just doing more damage than good. So always feel free to prop yourself up as high as possible, ground through the shin bones, and lift through the chest. Take the top of the mouth over the pelvis, the palate over the pelvis, and then close your eyes and find a really soft, gentle, seated pose. I hope that this has served you. I hope that this has made it somewhat easier for you to be in seated pose. If you have any comments or questions, please feel free to let me know. And hopefully this will give you some space to be in meditation and pranayama practice for longer periods of time. All right, my friends. Thanks so much for being here. Bye for now.